not too bad for a home. But at the time of its purchase, the house looked quite a bit different. First of all, back then it was all painted white, and it was about half the size, almost exactly the size as the house across the corner that we just walked past with the dark gray and the green shutters. It was about a 1.5-story cottage in 1844, but that was all right. That's all that the Lincolns were looking for at that time, because then it was just Abraham, his wife Mary, and their first baby son, Robert. But this is the house that the Lincolns would live in for 17 years. So that is longer than Abraham Lincoln would live anywhere else in his life, and this would be the only home that he ever owned in his life as well, right? Because he never owned the log cabins that he grew up in. He didn't own the White House afterwards, but he did own this home here. 3 of his sons would also be born inside this house. So that is Eddie, Willie, and Tad Lincoln. And so eventually, by 1856, the family would have completed some full renovations to their house. It was needed. Adding the full second-story addition to their house that you can see today. And in doing that, they would essentially turn 1 bedroom on the bottom floor into 5 bedrooms upstairs. And we will get to see all of them when we go through. So let's go through.
We had a yellow lab mix by the name of Fido, and he had a bunch of cats. His wife said he was a bit of a cat collector, and come home from a day in town, sometimes I would be stray man.
Of the Lincoln home. This is probably the most appropriate place for us to start the inside of the tour, because if we were all the guests of the Lincolns while they were living here, then this is the space where they would be entertaining us here. Now, the parlor was always the fanciest, most formal section of the house, as you can see with all of their fancy decorations here. But it wasn't always this large double parlor space. So before the family would do some renovations to the upstairs of the house, these double doors here did not originally exist. These doors are original, but at first this was just a wall. And this back room here that many of you are standing in was the family bedroom, as it was one of the largest rooms on the first floor. It could support a large family bed. So that means that in this back room is where Eddie, Willie, and Tad Lincoln would all be born. Now, Eddie Lincoln is the second-born Lincoln son, the firstborn inside this house. Unfortunately, he would only live to be just under 4 years old before he would pass away from tuberculosis in 1850. And the family would hold the funeral for Eddie in the front parlor here. Now, fast forward a couple years. Once the family had completed the renovations to the upstairs, they no longer needed their bedroom on the bottom floor here, because they added all of the space upstairs. So they added these double doors and opened this up to the large double parlor space that you see today. But it's around that same time that Abraham and Mary would decide to try very hard to keep Willie and Tad, their 2 youngest sons, out of this parlor space now. So if you heard about Willie and Tad, you know that they were some troublemakers. And the parents wanted to keep this parlor space nice for their guests, and so to do that, the door leading to the entrance that we just walked through and the door leading to the dining room right there, most of the time were closed and locked, keeping Willie and Tad out. But I think because of that, there were so many of their artifacts that were in such great condition that they're still here today. And I'll point them out to you here. So the marble table in the front of the room right here, that is an original artifact that belongs to the Lincolns. This shelf in front of us, the tiered shelf with all of the things on it, is called a whatnot shelf, because that's where you display your whatnots. That belonged to the Lincolns as well. The bookshelf in the back corner over there also belongs to the Lincolns, and there's one book in there that we're certain was read by Mr. Lincoln himself in that bookshelf. And then any of the black horsehair upholstered furniture as well, like the rocking chairs or the couches at the end and the smaller chairs against the wall, those are original furniture pieces as well. And so I like to imagine Abraham and Mary in here entertaining their 300 guests on the rocking chairs. And yes, they did have a party one time where they had 300 guests show up in the parlor here throughout the day.
Do you know what the upholstery is on that couch specifically?
Yes, it's black horsehair upholstery. So it's like a woven horsehair with some other fiber with it, but as horsehair, black dye horsehair. Yeah. No, she did not. She did not. Okay. We're gonna get very close by the end, I promise. Almost the end. All right, well, this second room that we're in now, this is the sitting room, or maybe called the family parlor as well. What that essentially means is that this is the more casual spot for the family to be with one another. Or if Willie and Tad were not allowed in the parlor space that we just came from, well, they would be allowed in here to play with each other, or maybe even read a book. Now, at the front of the room here, under the mirror, is Mary Lincoln's original sewing table. So that's where Mary Lincoln might be sitting in here, repairing some holes in socks or pant legs for her boys. Perhaps after one of their 3-on-1 wrestling matches against their dad. That was pretty common here. And it mostly would happen outside, but if it was happening inside, then that was in this room here. Now, at the other end of the room, it's a pretty interesting artifact on the table there, that tall box with the open top. That is an original artifact that belonged to the Lincoln boys, though. It's a pretty fancy toy for them called a stereoscope. And it cost around $20 at the time of its purchase, but adjusted for inflation and all that, that's now close to $900. So this is a $900 toy today for the Lincoln boys. And it works by taking those cards in front of it that have 2 images on each. You can see some of them. You put them in the box and you look through the eye holes, and it projects the image as a 3D picture. So this box here is like the earliest Viewmaster that the Lincolns could get their hands on, or even like a very early VR headset for them.
That was like before or after the handheld ones?
It was probably around the same time. Kind of that technology had come around, but this one being encased in the wooden box and all fancy, that one was a fancier version of one of those things. Now, these sketches that you see on the ground, you may have seen some similar looking ones in the parlor that we were just in. These are copies of sketches that were done for Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper in 1861, after Lincoln had been elected president. And they were done pretty much because Abraham Lincoln was the first man elected president who was born from outside of the original 13 colonies. And the public, they were very curious at that time to see how their president was living out here in the frontier. And so they needed sketches of his house. And so these sketches were done and published to basically show that he was not still living in his log cabin, but he was doing quite nice out here in Springfield. And additionally, these sketches were pretty much the primary sources used to get the rooms back into their original shape, because they existed, but there were no photos of the original bottom floor of the Lincoln home. And so you can match them up, and I think they did a pretty good job. But I always say that from these sitting room sketches, there is something missing, and that's the family pets. Because they did have pets here in Springfield. Most notably Fido. That was their golden lab mix that lived with them here until they moved away to Springfield, or to Washington, excuse me. And while they were in this house, you could expect maybe half a dozen cats to be inside as well. Yes. Mary would say that Abraham's favorite pastime was collecting cats, which basically means that on his way home from the old state house or his law office, if there were some friendly strays on the way, then he would just bring them inside. Green wallpaper. So that was the guest room of the Lincoln home. So once they renovated their upstairs here, they added that guest bedroom. And if you got to see inside, you may have noticed that it was pretty fancy in there. They had the large furniture pieces and wall-to-wall carpeting and even heating in there for their guests. So if you had a guest room, it was pretty common for it to be, a step above in terms of how nice it was compared to the master bedrooms, because you really wanted to be able to accommodate your guests. And that's what was seen as high class, and the Lincolns wanted that with their new renovated home here. So they added the guest bedroom. Now, this bedroom that we're in now, this one is Abraham Lincoln's bedroom, and the one behind me is Mary Lincoln's bedroom. And I'll start off by asking, what do you guys think of this wallpaper? Busy. Busy is the most common word used to describe it, for sure, when people see it today. But the reason I ask is because the wallpaper throughout pretty much the rest of the house is our best guess as to what was here in the Lincoln's time. Wallpaper deteriorates rather quickly. It's our best guess throughout the house, except for these 2 rooms. These are exact copies of the wallpaper that the Lincolns had. And we know this because the original wallpaper was well preserved and then sent to a location to be copied for its exact pattern and color. And this was Mary Lincoln's choice. She picked this out of a catalog when the upstairs was renovated, and it came all the way from Paris, France. And Mary spoke fluent French, and she actually lived in France for a number of years later in her life. And this was a popular choice in Paris, and so her knowledge of French culture, brought it here. Now, the two rooms, there's a couple reasons for why there's Mary's room and Abraham's room, but most easily said is, while Abraham was here, he was on the judicial circuit as well, so that means he would be away from his family and home here, often for 3 to 6 months out of the year. So Mary was in this house a lot more than Abraham was. It made all the sense in the world for her to have her own room with all of her things. The second reason, while Robert Lincoln was still living in the house before he would move away to college, Willie and Tad, those two troublemakers, would be sleeping in a pull-out mattress in their mother's room. And then the third reason is that this is not just a bedroom space for Mr. Lincoln. If you could keep the kids out, this is also an office space, a place for him to get his work done while he's in the home here. So I'd like to point out that desk in the corner there, it's called a pigeonhole desk. That is an original artifact. That was the one that belonged to Mr. Lincoln in his bedroom here. Likely the desk where he would have written speeches like his House Divided speech and his farewell address to Springfield would have been at that desk. But I also like that desk for another reason, because Abraham Lincoln was 6'4", and that desk is pretty tiny, and so you have to think of him, hunched over the desk there, working by candlelight. It's how he would have done it. And then the wardrobe and the dresser in this room, those are also original artifacts. That's where he would have kept his clothes. All right, and we're just gonna walk through Mary's room. This is the kitchen, final room. So this is where the meals would be prepared for the family or for the guests of the Lincolns. Most often by Mary in the house, or by the hired help that was conveniently just above the maid. Now this stove that you see here in the center, that is the one original artifact in the kitchen. But all the other pieces that you see here are antiques. Now, but for a majority of the time that the Lincolns lived in this house, they actually did not have this stove. Because there was a large open hearth fireplace roughly where that back cabinet is, for about 16 years. So they purchased this stove in 1860, which is only about 1 year before the family would move away to Washington. But Mary certainly appreciated the upgrade to this. After years of cooking on the open hearth fireplace, this made her life a little bit easier. But she would also perfect her famous white almond cake recipe on this stove, and we have the same recipe. We can give it out at the visitor center. But she would also request that this stove be brought with the family and installed into the White House when they moved to Washington. Now, a couple problems with that. The stove weighs around 700 pounds, so it's very impractical to move. They already had very nice stoves at the White House there, and people to cook on them, and so Abraham convinced her otherwise and said that this was an investment into their future in this home, and it should remain here for when they return to their home in Springfield. I think that was the right choice. But unfortunately with that, in 1865, after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, no other Lincoln would ever return to the home to live in it ever again. At that time, the ownership of the house would go to Robert Lincoln, and he would maintain ownership for about 20 years. He would have a caretaker and a few tenants rented out throughout that time. But then in 1887, Robert Lincoln would sell the whole property to the state of Illinois for $1. So he would essentially give it away, but only under the condition that it always remains open as a historic site, as it was when he was here with his family, and then free for visitors like yourselves to take tours.
Oh, wow.
So we still honor that today. Thank you.
Did they always have the kitchen inside the house even when they first moved in?
They had a brief outdoor space. Actually, in the Dean house, one of the other homes, they have an exhibit with dioramas over time of the Lincoln home, and you can see their old outdoor kitchen area. Wash space, yeah, of course.